The ethics of vaccine passports. Now, in general terms, a vaccine passport is proof that a person has been immunized that allows that person access or entry that would otherwise be restricted. The use and requirements of these passports varies greatly from place to place. New York, for example, has tested an app version of a passport to allow access to professional sports games. The governors of Florida, my adopted state, and Texas have, as one would imagine, signed executive orders banning the government from issuing these passports, and they have used the coercive power of the state to forbid businesses from requiring them. As such, the situation is effectively chaos. Now, while Fox News and others on the right have used hyperbole and likely falsehoods to make vaccine passports into a firestorm political issue, there are rational ethical concerns about these passports. While one might wonder why the right does not rationally advance such moral concerns, since there are legitimate concerns there, the easy and obvious reasons are that these concerns generally don't match up with the espoused values of, using the term very generally, the right. And most of this sort of moral reasoning is extremely dull compared to the engaging and enraging power of hyperbole and what might be alright lies. Now to the moral issues. As I noted earlier, New York has been testing an app version of a vaccine passport, and this raises clear moral concerns about access to these passports. A person would need to have a phone that is capable of running such an app. While many would assume that everyone has easy access to such phones, everywhere you go, there's somebody with a phone in their face, this is actually not the case. There are people who, for a variety of reasons, prefer more basic phones that don't actually run such apps. And even people, this may sound inconceivable, who don't have phones at all, for a variety of reasons. Now, if we extend the scope of moral concern beyond the United States, the matter becomes even more serious. Fortunately, there's a relatively easy way to address this issue, namely physical proof of vaccination can be given to people. This, of course, does lead to other problems, such as the practical matter of integrating all the various methods of proof in an effective way. But this is on par with identifying documentation from diverse sources, which we already do, and this could be managed, as we already do. But to even have a legitimate vaccine passport, a person must, of course, be vaccinated. While there is a worldwide rollout of the vaccine, the process is still underway as this is being recorded. While the vaccines vary, a person getting the shot rather than short, can need to wait over a month after their first shot before they're fully vaccinated. So you get the shot, and then you have this waiting period, maybe 21 days, 28 days, your next shot, then it's another couple of weeks. Now, there's also the matter of access to vaccines. This has been extremely limited in some areas, and so imposing vaccine passports now would lock many people out of access for a while, perhaps more than a while, maybe for quite a while. So once again, if we extend the scope of concern beyond the United States, the disparity becomes even greater in terms of ready access to the vaccine. As such, requiring vaccine passports would impose greater restrictions on people who have yet to be fully vaccinated. Now, this concern could be countered by a utilitarian argument, which would go like this. While the disparity of access will cause some harm, this is offset by the harms prevented by requiring vaccine passports. And the general idea is standard utilitarianism, weighing pluses and minuses, and the idea would be that the pluses outweigh the minuses, so it is good. Now, this disparity, of course, will also be addressed as more people are vaccinated. But this does lead to the concern about people who do not want to get vaccinated. Now, people are refusing the vaccines for various reasons. Some have rational reasons based on concerns about the rapidity of the development of the vaccines and the lack of information about possible long-term harms. Those are rational concerns. They were pushed through very quickly. They have emergency use authorization in the United States, and we don't know what the long-term harms are going to be because it hasn't been long-term. Now, other people are driven by irrational fears about vaccination in general, or fears driven by repeatedly debunked conspiracy theories like the microchips, etc. There will presumably also be a few people who cannot get the vaccines because of real health issues, such as allergies or other factors. These people will, of course, not be able to get a vaccine passport, whether they simply refuse or cannot get it, and they will be denied access to certain things if the passports are, become a thing. Now, a reasonable reply is to make the usual utilitarian argument once more. While these people will suffer some harm by being denied access, this is offset by the harm it will prevent. In this case, the inconvenience of not having a passport is weighed against people risking getting and spreading, the disease because they're not vaccinated. Now, the ethics of requiring people to have vaccinations to access certain goods and services is actually well established. So the main question is what access should be limited to those with proof of vaccination. To illustrate, traveling abroad often requires proof of vaccination for one's own safety and the safety of others. Adding COVID vaccinations to the list would not seem to impose an undue burden on travelers. If you already have to get a shot to travel someplace, getting another shot, it's another shot, but not a big imposition if you're already getting shots. As another example, proof of vaccination is required to attend schools in the United States and many places. This is because a person who is unvaccinated can cause potential harm to themselves or other students. And the idea is the potential harm of the unvaccinated student being in school outweighs concerns about the right of freedom to not get vaccinated. Now, in my own case, I consider being vaccinated generally a plus. It's like, to use a gaming term, it's like getting resistance or, getting a plus on your saving throw. And that seems like a good thing, that it's less likely to get diseased. So there are those who do consider vaccination a negative. So if a person does consider vaccination a negative, then you can still justify it. You can present it as the price one must pay to receive the benefits of being in society, such as public education. So giving up some freedoms to allow society to function safely is well established in moral philosophy. One can turn to philosophers such as our good dead friend John Locke and our good dead friend Thomas Hobbes for these sorts of arguments, going from the state of nature to the state of civil society. Now, if a person wants to live in a state of irresponsible and dangerous freedom, then they do have the right to that option. They can abandon civil society and live in the wilds of the state of nature, far from others who prefer having civilization. Now, a sensible reply to this is to note that my argument is based on a very limited requirements for vaccination. Only cases of travel and school. Now, I agree with the sensible reply. The existing and clearly warranted vaccination requirements are limited to cases where close contact with others, or exposure to them, is likely, such as in schools. As such, arguments would be needed for broader requirements, and these probably need to be made for each general sort of requirement, such as requiring them for access to sporting events or particular stores. Now, one morally reasonable approach would be to use vaccination passports to allow people access to venues that should remain closed, medically speaking, without these vaccinations. These would, of course, be what we consider non-essential goods and services. For example, crowded sporting or entertainment events are not essential in the same way that grocery stores are, and these are also more risky than grocery stores. So one should not propose them for grocery stores because everyone needs food. But everyone doesn't need, say, to see the New York Yankees play. As such, granting early access to people who have been vaccinated would allow these venues to reopen safely. This could also incentivize people to get vaccinated. And once herd immunity is established, then the vaccine passports could be discontinued. They would, one hopes, no longer be needed. Now, the practical problem is, of course, that the right, broadly construed, has already made vaccine passports into a battleground in their endless war against social responsibility. One could perhaps criticize others for not doing a good job selling the idea of the vaccine passport as a tool to speed getting back to normal, but the weight of the blame must fall on Fox News and their fellows who made the pandemic a political battle rather than a national health crisis. I mean, it is a national health crisis, but it's been cast as a political battle. So while the opposition to vaccine passports often focuses on choice and freedom, there is also the question of the choice and freedom of other people, and not just the people who don't want to get the vaccine or get the passport. So when it comes to freedom, a core debate is over the extent to which one's freedom can impose on another person's freedom and rights. In some cases, the answer is obvious. My freedom to drive my truck does not extend to running over you, nor does it extend to driving around inside the place where you live. I do not have a right to drive my truck, say you live in a house, to smash through your front door and drive around your house. So there are limits to freedom, even truck freedom, the greatest freedom of all. In the case of vaccinations of any kind, a person does have the moral right to refuse the vaccination. But this freedom can be offset and limited by the right of other people to not be exposed to disease. To use an analogy, while I do have the freedom to urinate as I wish, the secret amendment of free urination, I don't have the freedom to urinate on you or your stuff. My right to urinate as I please, has clear limits when this right can cause harm to others. And so, that's a silly example, but the point is that pretty much everyone would agree that each of us has a right to urinate when we need to, but we don't have a right to go around in public urinating on other people, because that would harm them. Or maybe some people do. I'm not going to judge your view of urination. Now, as a counter, one can point out that there are many diseases circulating that we are not required to get vaccinated against to go about our daily lives. For example, there are vaccines for hepatitis A and hepatitis B, but we were, in the before time, able to go about our daily business without getting these shots. In general, there's some exceptions. As another example, the flu vaccine is generally not required. There are, of course, exceptions for certain workplaces. The easy and obvious example, is that these diseases are rarer than COVID, or less infectious than COVID, or far less severe. And as a rule, imposing on people is less justified in cases where the possibility of harm is less. And that's a principle that applies very broadly. Now, in the case of businesses, there is the moral concern that denial of service to people who refuse to get vaccinated might harm those people. On the one hand, it can be argued that they made their choice. If I insist on going to a business totally naked, no socks, no shoes, no pants, nothing, and worse, urinating on people there, then it would be reasonable for the business to ban me. It would be my fault, for example, that I can't go to Krispy Kreme donuts because I went there naked and urinated all over the store. That's on me. Putting people, in that situation violates their freedom. It would be totally my fault. Likewise, if someone doesn't want to get vaccinated, that you could say that's their choice, they could be justly banned for being a danger to others. On the other hand, one could argue that a business does not have the right to deny service to people, even when it's a matter of preventing harm, or a matter of belief. As an aside, it'd be interesting to see a business owner bring a religious liberty lawsuit to allow them to refuse people who are not vaccinated on religious grounds. Now, a person might say, well, what religion is that? That's crazy. That can't be a religion. Well, religions can be just about anything and can have almost any belief. And that's not a religion, that's not a correct belief, really doesn't apply in the case of most religion, at least legally speaking. Again, it would be an interesting case to see. Maybe the church of don't kill people by being irresponsible and not getting vaccinated. Maybe that could be a church. Now, I think the vaccine passports are morally acceptable, kind of broadly speaking. One could obviously make up, extreme cases, where you couldn't be allowed to even leave your house without one. But, as a general thing, there's nothing inherently morally problematic with vaccine passports. Now, my practical view, of course, is a bit more complicated. As noted above, requiring COVID vaccination proof in cases which already require proof of vaccination, such as school, certain workplaces, and certain travel, is morally uncontroversial. If when I, went to school, K through 12, had to have all my shots, have proof of that's just, reasonable. That way I'm not a danger to all those other kids and not spreading disease to them. And when I went to college, I had to provide proof as well, because I'm going to be in a dorm, be in crowded classrooms, and I have a moral responsibility not to spread disease to other people. So, I had my shots. Also, in the case of, travel. So those are all morally uncontroversial. And in a way, it would be kind of needlessly, I guess, problematic or controversial to even call them vaccine passports. You would just, call it proof of vaccination and just use it like we normally do. Now, since the right, or some on the right, have turned vaccine passports into yet another stupid battle in their deranged war on social responsibility and ethics, then using them to provide incentives for vaccination and to increase public safety in the short term will be difficult, if not impossible, in some states. For example, Florida has already killed the idea of these passports, through executive order. That said, some other states might be able to use them correctly and effectively, thus fueling the rage of Fox and friends. So that concludes our look at the ethics of vaccine passports and the age of, rage. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.